I walked into Meridian Capital at 8:45 on a Monday morning in November, and by 9:15, I was being escorted back out with a cardboard box and a security guard at my elbow. It was my first day. The recruiter had called me 6 weeks earlier. Meridian was expanding their international division, and they wanted someone who could close complex deals with Asian markets. They had seen my work at Brennan and Associates. They knew about the Takeda relationship. The CEO himself, Richard Hartwell, had interviewed me over dinner at Per Se and told me I would have autonomy, a clear VP track, and the resources to build something significant. I negotiated my salary up by 30% and signed the offer letter on a Tuesday afternoon in October. I gave Brennan 2 weeks' notice. I said goodbye to my team. I packed up my office and took my clients with me, the way senior people do when they move. Hiroshi Takeda, the COO of Takeda Industries, sent me a congratulatory email. He trusted me. We were days away from signing a $4.8 billion infrastructure contract, the largest deal I had ever worked on and the largest Meridian had ever seen. The contract was in my bag that morning, printed and ready for final review. I thought I was walking into the best opportunity of my career. Instead, I walked into a glass-walled conference room on the 7th floor, and a woman I had never met told me I was fired. Her name was Sloane Hartwell. She was 26, blonde, wearing a black theory suit that probably cost more than my first car. She was also the CEO's daughter, though I did not know that yet. I knew her title, Vice President of Strategic Operations. I had assumed I would meet her eventually. I did not expect her to be the first person I spoke to. She did not shake my hand. There were 4 other people in the room. 2 from HR, both women in their 40s with tight smiles and laptops open. 1 senior executive I recognized from my interview process, a man named Greg Ashford, who would not make eye contact. And Sloane, sitting at the head of the table like she was running a board meeting. I sat down. I set my bag on the floor next to my chair. I smiled because I still thought this was onboarding. Sloane did not smile back. She said, "This is going to be quick. We have decided to restructure the international division, and your position is redundant. We are letting you go effective immediately." I stared at her. I thought I had misheard. "I am sorry," I said. "I just started today." "I understand that," Sloane said. Her voice was flat, like she was reading from a script. "But the decision has been made. We will provide you with 2 weeks severance and a reference letter. Carla will walk you through the paperwork." One of the HR women, Carla, slid a folder across the table. I did not touch it. "I was recruited for this role," I said. My voice was calm, but my hands were cold. "I left my previous firm. I have active client relationships. I am in the middle of closing a major deal." Sloane looked at me like I had just told her I believed in astrology. "We are aware of your background," she said. "But the structure has changed. We no longer need someone in your role." Greg Ashford shifted in his seat. He still would not look at me. I wanted to ask if Richard Hartwell knew about this. I wanted to ask if anyone had reviewed my file, if anyone understood what I had been hired to do. I wanted to ask Sloane if she had any idea what she was about to destroy. But I did not ask any of that, because I could see it in her face. She did not care. She had made a decision, and I was a line item. "This is a mistake," I said. Sloane stood up. "Carla will handle the exit process. Thank you for your time." She walked out. I sat there for another 10 minutes while Carla explained my severance package and asked me to sign a non-disclosure agreement. I signed it because I did not know what else to do. Greg Ashford left halfway through without saying a word. The other HR woman, whose name I never learned, avoided looking at me the entire time. When it was over, Carla handed me a cardboard box and walked me back to the elevator. A security guard met us in the lobby. He was polite but firm. He stood next to me while I walked out the front doors onto 6th Avenue. The whole thing took 26 minutes. I stood on the sidewalk with the box in my hands and my bag over my shoulder. It was cold. The wind came off the Hudson and cut through my coat. People walked past me in both directions, fast and indifferent. I could see my reflection in the glass doors behind me. I looked calm. I looked fine. I was not fine. I walked 3 blocks to a Starbucks and sat in the back corner. I opened my bag and pulled out the contract. 462 pages, bound in a black leather portfolio with the Meridian Capital logo embossed on the cover. Takeda Industries. $4.8 billion over 7 years. I had spent 18 months building this relationship. 4 trips to Tokyo. I had earned Hiroshi Takeda's trust by being precise, by listening, by understanding what he needed before he said it out loud. And now, I was sitting in a Starbucks with a cardboard box and no job, and the contract was just paper. I put it back in my bag and went home. I sat on my couch and tried to figure out what the hell had just happened. It would take 3 days for them to realize what they had done. By then, it would be too late to fix it the way they wanted. The Takeda deal started in May of the previous year, back when I was still at Brennan & Associates. I had been there for 6 years. I was good at my job. I understood infrastructure finance, and I understood how to build relationships with clients who did not make decisions quickly. Takeda Industries was both. They were a 112-year-old Japanese conglomerate with interests in construction, energy, and logistics. They were expanding into Southeast Asia and needed a partner who could structure financing for long-term projects across multiple countries. The deal was worth billions, but it would take time. My boss at Brennan handed me the lead in June. He said, "They are conservative. They will not sign anything until they trust you. Do not rush them." I did not rush them. I spent 2 weeks reading everything I could find about Takeda Industries, their history, their leadership, their corporate philosophy, which emphasized long-term relationships over short-term profit. I learned that Hiroshi Takeda, the COO, had a degree in civil engineering from MIT and had spent 15 years working on infrastructure projects in Africa before returning to Tokyo to run operations. He valued precision and follow-through. He did not tolerate carelessness. I flew to Tokyo in July. The meeting was scheduled for 2 hours. I prepared for 6. I brought a presentation that outlined 3 financing structures, each tailored to a different risk profile. I did not oversell. I asked questions. I listened. Hiroshi was 53, gray at the temples, with the kind of calm that comes from decades of making decisions that matter. He did not smile much, but when he did, it meant something. He asked me about my background. I told him I had worked on infrastructure deals in Latin America and Eastern Europe. He asked me how I handled currency risk. I walked him through a hedging strategy I had used in Brazil. He nodded. At the end of the meeting, he said, "We will continue this conversation." That was all. But it was enough. Over the next year, I flew to Tokyo 3 more times. I met with Hiroshi and his team. I revised the financing structure twice based on their feedback. I learned the names of his senior directors. I sent follow-up emails that were clear and concise. I did not waste their time. I did not make promises I could not keep. By March of this year, we were close. Hiroshi told me the board was ready to move forward. The contract was being drafted. It was $4.8 billion over 7 years, covering infrastructure projects in Vietnam, Thailand, and Indonesia. It was the largest deal Brennan had ever closed, and it was mine. And then Meridian Capital called. They had heard about the Takeda deal. They wanted me. They offered me a senior director title, a significant raise, and the promise of a VP role within a year. Richard Hartwell, the CEO, took me to dinner and told me that Meridian was building an international division and needed someone who could lead it. He said, "Bring the Takeda deal with you. We will give you the resources to close it and the autonomy to build something bigger." I hesitated. I liked Brennan. But Meridian was offering me something Brennan could not: a clear path to leadership. I was 32. I wanted to build something that was mine. I told Hiroshi I was moving to Meridian. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "If you are going, we will follow you. But the trust is in you, not the firm." I understood what he meant. The deal was personal. If I failed, it would not just be Meridian's loss. It would be mine. I gave Brennan 2 weeks' notice. I signed the offer letter with Meridian in early October. The Takeda contract was nearly finished. Hiroshi and I had scheduled a final review meeting for mid-November. The signing was supposed to happen by the end of the month. I thought I had made the right choice. I thought Meridian understood what they were getting. But when I walked into that conference room on my first day and Sloan Hartwell told me I was fired, I realized something. She had no idea who I was. She had no idea what I had brought with me. She had looked at my file, seen that I had been hired 3 weeks earlier, and decided I was expendable. She did not know about Hiroshi. She did not know about the 18 months of work. She did not know about the $4.8 billion contract sitting in my bag. Or maybe she did know, and she just did not care. Either way, she had made a choice. And now, I had to figure out what mine would be. I sat on my couch that afternoon and stared at my phone. I knew I should call Hiroshi. I knew I should explain what had happened. But I did not know what to say. How do you tell a client who trusted you that you were fired on your first day at the firm you convinced him to work with? I did not call him. Not yet. I told myself I needed time to think. I told myself I would figure it out. But the truth was, I was afraid. I was afraid that if I called him, he would hear the uncertainty in my voice. I was afraid that the deal I had spent 18 months building would collapse because I had made the wrong choice. So I waited. And while I waited, everything started to fall apart. By 6 that evening, I was still on my couch. I had not eaten. I had not changed out of the clothes I wore to the office. I kept replaying the meeting in my head. Sloane's flat voice. Greg Ashford refusing to look at me. The security guard standing next to me in the lobby like I was a threat. My phone buzzed. A text from a number I did not recognize. "Nora, it's Jordan Kim. We met during your interview. What the hell happened today?" Jordan. I remembered him. Mid-30s, sharp, one of the senior analysts in the international division. He had asked good questions during my interview. He seemed like someone who actually cared about the work. I texted back. "I was let go. Restructuring, apparently." 3 dots appeared immediately. Then, "That's not what Sloan told us. She said you quit." I stared at the screen. She said I quit. I felt something cold settle in my chest. It was not just that I had been fired. It was that Sloan was lying about it. She was rewriting the story to make it look like I had walked away. Like I was unstable. Like I could not handle the job. I typed back. "I did not quit. I was fired in a conference room with HR and escorted out by security." Jordan's response came fast. "Jesus, I'm sorry. That's insane." I set the phone down. I wanted to be angry, but I was too tired. Anger takes energy, and I had none left. I pulled the contract out of my bag and set it on the kitchen counter. 462 pages, months of work, Hiroshi's trust. All of it sitting there like a bomb that had not gone off yet. I thought about calling him. I picked up my phone twice and put it back down both times. What would I say? That I had been fired on my first day? That the firm he had agreed to work with had decided I was redundant before I even started? That I had convinced him to follow me, and now I had nothing to offer him? I could not do it. Not yet. I made myself eat something. I took a shower. I tried to sleep. At 9:30, my phone rang. I looked at the screen. Hiroshi Takeda. My stomach dropped. I answered. Hiroshi, hi. His voice was calm, but there was something underneath it. Concern, maybe, or suspicion. Nora, I hope I am not calling too late. Not at all, I said. I kept my voice steady. How are you? I am well. I wanted to reach out because I heard something today, and I wanted to confirm it with you directly. I closed my eyes. What did you hear? I heard that you are no longer with Meridian Capital. Silence. I did not ask him where he heard it. It did not matter. Someone had talked. Maybe someone at Meridian. Maybe someone in the industry. Word travels fast when a deal this size is involved. There has been a transition, I said carefully. I am working through some details with the firm. A transition, Hiroshi repeated. His tone did not change, but I could hear the question in it. Yes, there was a miscommunication about my role. It is being resolved. Another pause. Longer this time. Nora, he said, I want to be clear about something. Takeda's relationship is with you, not with Meridian. If you are not there, we will need to reconsider our timeline. I felt the weight of it. He was not threatening me. He was telling me the truth. The deal was personal. If I was gone, the deal was gone. I understand, I said. I will have more information for you in the next day or two. I promise. I trust you, Hiroshi said. But I need clarity soon. The board is expecting movement. You will have it, I said. We said goodbye. I set the phone down and stared at the contract on the counter. The deal was in jeopardy. Not because of the terms, not because of the financing structure, because I had been fired by someone who did not know what she was doing. I thought about calling Richard Hartwell. I thought about demanding an explanation. But I did not have his direct number, and I was not sure he even knew what had happened yet. I sat there for a long time, and then I did something I had not done since I was 23 and lost my first major client. I let myself feel it. The humiliation, the anger, the fear that I had made a mistake I could not fix. And then I put it away, because feeling it would not solve the problem. And I had a problem to solve. I opened my laptop. I pulled up Hiroshi's last email. I drafted a response, carefully worded, that bought me 48 hours. I told him I was finalizing my transition with Meridian and would have a full update by Wednesday. I did not lie, but I did not tell him the whole truth either. I hit send. Then I opened a new document and started writing down everything I knew. What Sloan had said, what Carla had said, what Jordan had told me, the lie about me quitting, the fact that Richard Hartwell probably did not know I had been fired. I did not know what I was going to do with the information yet, but I knew I needed it organized. By midnight, I had a plan. Not a good one, but a plan. I would wait. I would let them realize what they had done. And when they came back, because they would come back, I would be ready. I went to bed. I did not sleep well, but I slept. And the next morning, everything started to move faster than I expected. Tuesday morning, I woke up to 3 missed calls from a number I did not recognize and an email from Hiroshi's assistant. The email was short, professional, deadly. Dear Meridian Capital team, we are reaching out to confirm the status of Ms. Nora Chen's role with your firm. as we have been unable to reach her directly through company channels. Please advise at your earliest convenience. Best regards, Yuki Tanaka, Executive Assistant to Hiroshi Takeda, COO. I read it twice. Then I checked the recipient list. She had sent it to Meridian's general inquiry address, and she had copied Richard Hartwell directly. I set my phone down. I poured coffee. I waited. It took less than an hour. Jordan texted me at 9:15. Holy hell! Did Takeda's office just email Richard about you? I did not respond. At 9:40, my phone rang. Unknown number. I let it go to voicemail. The voicemail was from someone in Meridian's HR department asking me to call back regarding an urgent matter. I deleted it. At 10:30, Jordan texted again. Richard just called an emergency meeting. Sloan looks like she's going to throw up. What is happening? I smiled. Just a little. I texted back. Let me know what you hear. I spent the rest of the morning working out. I went to the gym in my building and ran on the treadmill for 40 minutes. I lifted weights. I showered. I made lunch. I did not check my phone. When I finally looked at it again, it was 1 p.m, and I had 6 missed calls and 11 text messages. 3 calls from Meridian HR. 2 from a number I did not recognize. 1 from Richard Hartwell's direct line. I listened to his voicemail. Nora, this is Richard Hartwell. I just learned about what happened yesterday, and I need to speak with you as soon as possible. There has been a serious miscommunication, and I want to resolve it immediately. Please call me back at this number. Thank you. His voice was calm, but I could hear the strain underneath it. He was trying to sound in control. He was not in control. Jordan's text told me the rest. Richard found out Sloan fired you without telling him. He didn't know about the Takeda deal. She didn't review your file. He's losing his mind. Sloan said she thought you were junior. She said your title didn't sound senior. Greg Ashford just got pulled into Richard's office. This is a disaster. I sat on my couch and read through the messages slowly. I felt something settle in my chest. Not satisfaction exactly, more like clarity. They had made a mistake, a big one, and now they knew it. I thought about calling Richard back. I thought about making him wait longer, but I did not want to play games. I wanted leverage. I called him at 2. He answered on the first ring. Nora, thank you for calling me back. Richard, I said. My voice was even, professional. I got your message. I want to apologize, he said. What happened yesterday was unacceptable. There was a miscommunication within the leadership team, and you were let go without proper review. I take full responsibility. A miscommunication, I repeated. Yes, Sloan was not aware of the scope of your role or the client relationships you brought with you. She made a decision without consulting me, and it was the wrong decision. I let the silence sit for a moment. Sloan told my team I quit, I said. Richard hesitated. That was also a miscommunication. She misunderstood the situation. She lied, I said. She told people I walked away. That is not a miscommunication. That is a lie. Another pause. Longer this time. You are right, Richard said, and I will address that. But right now, I need to focus on moving forward. I want to bring you back. Immediately. We can reinstate your position, and I will personally ensure that you have the autonomy and resources I promised you. And the Takeda deal? I asked. That is why I am calling, Richard said. His voice tightened. Hiroshi Takeda's office reached out to us this morning. They are asking about your status. I need to know where we stand with that relationship. I almost laughed. He needed to know where we stood. The deal is in jeopardy, I said. Hiroshi called me last night. He heard I was no longer with Meridian. I told him there was a transition, but he made it very clear that Takeda's relationship is with me, not with the firm. If I am not there, the deal is not there. Silence. How much time do we have? Richard asked. Not much. He is expecting an update by tomorrow. The board is waiting. Then we need to move quickly, Richard said. I want to bring you back today. We can have the paperwork ready by this afternoon. I will personally apologize to you and to the team. We can fix this. I stood up and walked to the window. I looked out at the street below. People walking, cars moving, the world continuing like nothing had happened. I need to think about it, I said. Nora, Richard said, and now I could hear the desperation. I understand you are upset. You have every right to be. But this deal is worth $4.8 billion. It is the largest contract in Meridian's history. If it falls apart, it will hurt the firm. But it will also hurt you. Your reputation is tied to this deal. If it collapses, people will ask why. He was not wrong, and he knew it. I will think about it, I said again. I will call you tomorrow. Nora, please. I hung up. I set the phone down and stared at it. I had leverage now. Real leverage. They needed me more than I needed them. But Richard was right about one thing. If the Takeda deal collapsed, it would not just be Meridian's loss. It would be mine too. Hiroshi had trusted me. If I let this fall apart out of spite, it would follow me for the rest of my career. I thought about letting it burn. I thought about walking away and letting them fail. It would feel good. For a while. But it would not be smart. I opened my laptop. I started drafting a list. Not of demands exactly, terms. If I was going back, I was going back on my conditions, and they were going to pay for what they did. I spent Tuesday night writing and rewriting the list. It started as anger. I wanted to make them hurt. I wanted a title, a raise, an apology, and Sloane's head on a plate. I wanted everyone who had been in that conference room to know they had made a mistake. But by midnight, the list looked different. It was still hard, but it was strategic. I wanted my original title back. Senior Director of Business Development. I wanted a 20% raise on top of the salary they had already offered me. I wanted a percentage of the success fee from the Takeda deal, which would be substantial if we closed. I wanted a written guarantee of autonomy, signed by Richard, that protected me from being overruled by anyone in the firm without cause. And I wanted Sloane to publicly correct the lie she had told about me quitting. I did not want her fired. That would make me look vindictive. But I wanted her moved. Away from client-facing work. Away from me. I saved the document. I sent it to a lawyer I knew who specialized in employment contracts. She called me Wednesday morning at 8. This is aggressive, she said. But it is not unreasonable. If they need you as badly as you say they do, they will take it. And if they do not? I asked. Then you walk, and you let the deal die. I thanked her and hung up. I stared at my phone. I thought about Hiroshi. I thought about the 18 months I had spent building his trust. I thought about the board meeting he had scheduled, the timeline he had committed to, the faith he had placed in me when I told him I was moving to Meridian. If I walked away now, I would be breaking that trust. Not because I wanted to, but because I had been fired by someone who did not know what she was doing. It was not fair. But fairness did not matter. Consequences mattered. I thought about my career. I was 32. I had built a reputation for closing difficult deals. If the Takeda deal collapsed, people would ask why. They would hear that I had been fired on my first day. They would hear that the deal fell apart after I left. Some of them would blame Meridian, but some of them would blame me. They would say I should have handled it better. They would say I let my ego get in the way. They would say I was not as good as I thought I was. I could not let that happen, but I also could not go back and pretend nothing had happened. I could not let Meridian treat me like I was disposable and then act grateful when they changed their minds. I needed to go back, but I needed to go back with power. At 10, Richard called again. I let it ring 3 times before I answered. "Nora?" he said. "Have you had time to think?" "I have," I said. "And?" "I am willing to return, but I have conditions." I heard him exhale. Relief, maybe, or just the beginning of negotiation. "I am listening," he said. "I want my original title. I want a 20% raise. I want 3% of the success fee from the Takeda deal. I want a written guarantee of autonomy, signed by you, that protects me from being undermined by other executives. And I want Sloan to send an email to the team correcting the lie she told about me quitting." Silence. "That is a significant ask," Richard said carefully. "It is a significant deal," I said. $4.8 billion, the largest in your firm's history, and it only happens if I am there. I understand that, but 3% of the success fee is standard for a deal this size when the relationship is personal, I said. "You know that. Hiroshi made it very clear. The trust is in me, not in Meridian. If I walk, the deal walks. 3% is what I am worth." Another pause. "What about Sloan?" Richard asked. "She lied," I said. "She told people I quit. That damages my reputation. I want it corrected, publicly." "She made a mistake," Richard said, "but asking her to apologize publicly will humiliate her." "She humiliated me?" I said. "She fired me in front of 4 people and then lied about it. I am not asking for her job. I am asking for the truth." I could hear him breathing on the other end of the line. "I will need to discuss this with the board," he said. "You have until tomorrow morning," I said. "Hiroshi is expecting an update. If I do not have an answer from you by 9, I will tell him the deal is off." "Nora?" 9 a.m., Richard. I hung up. I set the phone down and realized my hands were shaking. I had just threatened to kill a $4.8 billion deal. I had just put my career on the line. If Richard called my bluff, if he decided I was not worth the trouble, I would have nothing. But I did not think he would call my bluff. Because he knew I was serious. And he knew I was right. I spent the rest of the day trying not to think about it. I went for a walk. I called my sister and told her a version of the story that did not include the part where I was gambling my entire future on one phone call. She told me I was brave. I did not feel brave. I felt terrified. At 7 that evening, my phone buzzed. A text from Jordan. "Richard just left the office. He looked like he aged 10 years. Whatever you are doing, it is working." I did not respond. At 8:30, Richard called. "We accept your terms," he said. I closed my eyes. "All of them?" I asked. "All of them. The raise, the success fee, the autonomy agreement. I will have the paperwork ready tomorrow morning, and Sloan will send the email." "What about her role?" I asked. "She is being moved to operations. She will no longer be involved in client-facing work." I felt something loosen in my chest. Not relief, exactly. More like the end of holding my breath. "I will be there at 9, I said. "Thank you, Nora," Richard said. "I know this was not easy, but I want you to know that I value what you bring to this firm, and I will make sure this does not happen again." I wanted to believe him, but I did not. "I will see you tomorrow," I said. I hung up. I sat on my couch and stared at the wall. I had won. I was going back. I was going back with more money, more power, and more protection than I had before. But I also knew something I had not known 3 days ago. Meridian did not care about me. They cared about the deal. And the moment I stopped being useful, they would do it again. I could not trust them. I could never trust them. But I could use them. And that would have to be enough. Wednesday morning, I walked back into Meridian Capital at 8:55. I wore the same suit I had worn on Monday. Navy blue, tailored, expensive. I wanted them to see exactly what they had thrown away. The lobby was the same. Glass and steel and the faint hum of ambition. The receptionist looked up when I walked in. Her eyes widened slightly. She had probably heard something. Everyone had probably heard something. "Nora Chen," I said. "I have a meeting with Richard Hartwell." She nodded quickly and picked up the phone. 30 seconds later, Richard's assistant came down to meet me. She was polite, professional, and did not ask any questions. She led me to the elevator and up to the executive floor. Richard's office was corner view, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking 6th Avenue. He was standing when I walked in. Sloane was sitting in one of the chairs across from his desk. She did not stand. "Nora," Richard said. He came around the desk and extended his hand. "Thank you for coming." I shook his hand. I did not smile. "Richard," I said. Then I looked at Sloane. "Sloane." She looked at me like I was something she had stepped in. Her jaw was tight. Her hands were folded in her lap. She was wearing black again. She looked tired. "Please, sit," Richard said. I sat in the chair next to Sloane. I set my bag on the floor. I did not take out any papers. I did not need to. I had already won. Richard sat behind his desk. He folded his hands and looked at me with the kind of expression that was supposed to convey sincerity. I had seen it before. It was the look men in power give you when they need something from you, but want you to think they are doing you a favor. "I want to start by apologizing," Richard said. "What happened on Monday was unacceptable. You were brought into this firm with specific promises, and those promises were not honored. That is on me. I take full responsibility." I nodded. I did not say anything. "I have reviewed your terms," Richard continued, "and I am prepared to accept them. All of them." He slid a folder across the desk. I opened it. Inside was a contract. My title. My salary, 20% higher than the original offer. The success fee clause, 3% of the total. The autonomy agreement, signed by Richard, stating that no executive could overrule my decisions on client relationships without documented cause and board approval. I read through it carefully. I took my time. Richard waited. Sloane stared at the wall. "This looks correct," I said. "Good," Richard said. "I will have HR process the paperwork today. You will be reinstated immediately, and your start date will be backdated to Monday, so there is no gap in your employment record." "And the email?" I asked. Richard looked at Sloane. She did not move. "Sloane has agreed to send a correction to the team," Richard said. "I want to see it before it goes out," I said. Sloane's head turned toward me. Her eyes were cold. "That is not necessary," she said. Her voice was clipped. "I know what needs to be said." "I want to see it," I repeated. Richard cleared his throat. "Sloane, please send Nora a draft before you send it to the team." Sloane's mouth tightened, but she nodded. "There is one more thing," Richard said. "Sloane will be transitioning to a new role within the firm. She will be overseeing operations and internal strategy. She will no longer be involved in client-facing work." I looked at Sloane. She was staring at Richard now, and I could see the anger in her face. She had not known. Or maybe she had known, but hearing it out loud made it real. "That seems appropriate," I said. Sloane stood up. "Is that all?" Richard hesitated. "Sloane, is that all?" she repeated. Yes, Richard said quietly. Sloane picked up her bag and walked out. She did not look at me. She did not say goodbye. The door closed behind her with a soft click. Richard exhaled. He looked older than he had at dinner 2 months ago. Tired, worn down. She is young, he said. She made a mistake. She made several mistakes, I said. And I am the one who paid for them. Richard nodded. I know, and I am sorry. I should have been more involved in the transition. I should have made sure she understood who you were and what you were bringing to the firm. Yes, I said. You should have. We sat in silence for a moment. I want you to know, Richard said, that I meant what I said at dinner. I believe in what you can build here, and I will make sure you have the support you need. I looked at him. I wanted to believe him. I wanted to think that this was a one-time failure, that Meridian was still the opportunity I had thought it was. But I did not believe him. Not really. I believed that he needed me right now. I believed that he would protect me as long as I was useful. But I also believed that the moment I stopped being useful, he would let someone else make the same mistakes Sloane had made. That was how places like this worked. Competence mattered, but only when it was convenient. I appreciate that, I said. I stood up. I need to call Hiroshi and give him an update. When can I tell him we are ready to move forward? Today, Richard said. Tell him we are ready to finalize the contract. Whatever he needs, we will make it happen. I nodded. I picked up my bag and walked to the door. Nora? Richard said. I turned. Thank you, he said, for coming back. I looked at him for a long moment. I did not come back for you, I said. I came back for the deal. I walked out. I took the elevator down to the 7th floor. My floor. The international division. I walked past the conference room where I had been fired 3 days earlier. The door was open. The room was empty. Jordan was at his desk. He looked up when he saw me and stood up immediately. You are back, he said. I am back, I said. I heard, he said. He lowered his voice. I heard you got everything you asked for. I did, I said. He smiled. Good. That is exactly what you deserved. I wanted to believe that, but I knew the truth. I had not gotten what I deserved. I had gotten what I had the leverage to demand. And the moment I lost that leverage, none of it would matter. Thanks, I said. I walked to my office. It was small, but it had a window. My name was already on the door. Someone had worked fast. I set my bag down. I sat at the desk. I pulled out my phone and called Hiroshi. He answered on the second ring. Nora, he said. I was hoping to hear from you. I have good news, I said. The transition is complete. I am back at Meridian, and we are ready to move forward with the contract. There was a pause. I am glad to hear that, Hiroshi said. But I want to be clear about something. I am moving forward because of you, not because of Meridian. I understand, I said. Good, he said. Then let us finish this. I hung up. I stared at the phone. I had won. I had my job back. I had my deal back. I had more money and more power than I had started with. But I had also learned something I could not unlearn. I was alone here, and I always would be. The final negotiation with Takeda was scheduled for Friday afternoon. 2 days to prepare. 2 days to make sure I had not just saved my career, but proven I was worth saving. Hiroshi flew in Thursday night with 3 members of his team. His general counsel, his CFO, and his head of international operations. I had met all of them before, but this time felt different. This time, they were not just evaluating the deal. They were evaluating me. We met at Meridian's offices at 2 on Friday. Richard had reserved the largest conference room, the one with the long table and the view of the city. He wanted it to feel important. He wanted Takeda to see that Meridian was serious. I arrived 15 minutes early. I set up my materials. I reviewed my notes one last time. I made sure the contract binders were arranged correctly, one for each person at the table. Richard came in at 1:50. He was wearing his best suit. He looked nervous. "Are you ready?" he asked. "I am ready," I said. "Good. I want you to lead the meeting. This is your deal. I am here to support you, but you are the one they trust." I nodded. I appreciated that he was saying it out loud, but I also knew it was true whether he said it or not. Hiroshi and his team arrived at 2 exactly, punctual, as always. I met them in the lobby and brought them upstairs. We shook hands. We exchanged pleasantries. Hiroshi's expression was calm, but I could see the question in his eyes. He was still deciding whether this was going to work. We sat down. Hiroshi at one end of the table, Richard at the other. I sat in the middle, across from Hiroshi's general counsel. The power map was clear. This was my meeting. "Thank you for coming," I said. "I know the last few days have been uncertain, and I want to address that directly before we move forward." Hiroshi nodded. "Please." I took a breath. I had practiced this part. I needed to be honest without making Meridian look incompetent. I needed to own the situation without apologizing for something that was not my fault. "There was a miscommunication within Meridian's leadership about my role when I started," I said. "It was resolved quickly, but I know it created concern on your side. I want to be very clear. My commitment to this deal has not changed. My relationship with Takeda has not changed, and I am here to make sure we finish what we started." Hiroshi looked at me for a long moment. Then he looked at Richard. "And you?" Hiroshi said. "You are committed to this deal?" "Absolutely," Richard said. "Nora has my full support, and Meridian's full support. We are ready to move forward." Hiroshi nodded slowly. He looked back at me. "I appreciate your honesty," he said. "But I want to be clear about something. Takeda's trust is in you, Nora, not in Meridian. If you were not here, we would not be here." The room went quiet. Richard shifted in his seat. I could feel the weight of what Hiroshi had just said. He was not being polite. He was drawing a line. "I understand," I said, "and I am here." Hiroshi smiled, just a little. "Then let us finish this." We spent the next 3 hours going through the contract, line by line. Hiroshi's general counsel had questions about the financing structure. I walked him through the hedging strategy, the currency protections, the risk allocation across the 3 countries. His CFO had concerns about the payment schedule. I showed him the cash flow projections, the milestone triggers, the contingency clauses we had built in. Every question they asked, I had an answer. Not because I was guessing, because I had done the work. I had spent 18 months learning their business, their priorities, their fears. I knew what they needed before they asked for it. At one point, Hiroshi's head of international operations asked about political risk in Vietnam. It was a good question. The kind of question that could kill a deal if the answer was not solid. I pulled up a risk assessment I had commissioned from a consulting firm that specialized in Southeast Asian infrastructure. I walked him through the analysis. I showed him the mitigation strategies we had built into the contract. I explained how we had structured the financing to account for regulatory changes. He nodded. "This is thorough." "Thank you," I said. Richard barely spoke. He was there, but he was not needed. This was my deal, my relationship, my work. By 5, we had covered everything. Hiroshi leaned back in his chair and looked at his team. They exchanged a few words in Japanese. Then he looked at me. "We are satisfied," he said. We are ready to move forward. I felt something release in my chest. Relief, exhaustion, pride. I am glad to hear that, I said. Hiroshi's general counsel pulled out a pen. When can we schedule the signing? Next week, I said. We will have the final documents ready by Monday. We can sign on Wednesday if that works for your schedule. Hiroshi nodded. Wednesday is fine. We stood. We shook hands. Hiroshi held my hand a moment longer than necessary. You did well, he said quietly. This was not easy, but you handled it with integrity. Thank you, I said. That means a lot. He smiled. I look forward to working with you, Nora, for a long time. They left. Richard walked them to the elevator. I stayed in the conference room and started packing up the materials. Jordan appeared in the doorway. That looked intense, he said. It was, I said. But you did it. I did it, I said. He grinned. You know everyone is talking about you, right? You got fired on Monday, and by Friday you closed a $4.8 billion deal. That is legendary. I smiled, but it felt tired. It does not feel legendary. It feels exhausting. Fair, he said. But still, you won. I looked at him. Did I? He frowned. What do you mean? I shook my head. Nothing. I am just tired. Richard came back into the room. He was smiling. Actually smiling. That was incredible, he said. Nora, you were incredible. Hiroshi clearly trusts you completely. I have never seen a negotiation go that smoothly. Thank you, I said. I mean it, Richard said. You saved this deal. You saved this firm. I will make sure the board knows that. I nodded. I did not know what to say. I had saved the deal. But I had also learned something I could not forget. The deal was mine. The relationship was mine. The work was mine. But the firm was not mine. It never would be. Richard left. Jordan left. I finished packing up and walked back to my office. I sat at my desk and stared at the contract binder. 462 pages, 18 months of work, $4.8 billion. I had done it. I had proven I was irreplaceable. But I had also proven something else. I was only valuable as long as I was useful. And the moment I stopped being useful, none of this would matter. I sat there for a while longer. The office was quiet. Most people had left for the weekend. I could hear the hum of the air conditioning, the distant sound of a phone ringing somewhere down the hall. I thought about Monday morning, walking into that conference room, Sloane's flat voice, the security guard, the cardboard box. I thought about Tuesday, sitting on my couch, wondering if my career was over. I thought about Wednesday, walking back in with my terms, watching Sloane's face when Richard told her she was being moved. 5 days. That was all it had taken. 5 days to lose everything and get it back. But I had not gotten it back the same way. I had gotten it back harder, sharper, with my eyes open. I closed the binder. I put it in my bag. I turned off the lights and walked out. The elevator was empty. The lobby was empty. I walked out onto 6th Avenue, and the cold hit me immediately. It was almost dark. The streetlights were on. People were walking past, heading to dinner or drinks or home. I stood there for a moment, just breathing. I had won. I had proven my worth. I had closed the deal. But I also knew that I would never feel safe here. Not really. I started walking, and I started thinking about what came next. Wednesday morning arrived cold and clear. The day of the signing. I got to the office at 7:30. The conference room was already set up. The contracts were printed and bound, one set for Takeda, one set for Meridian. The signing table was arranged with pens, water glasses, and small Meridian Capital folders that someone in marketing had prepared. It looked professional. It looked important. It looked like the kind of moment that was supposed to feel like a victory. Hiroshi and his team arrived at 9. We went through the final review together, page by page, making sure every signature line was correct, every initial was in place. His general counsel asked 2 last questions. I answered them. He nodded, satisfied. At 10, we gathered in the conference room for the signing. Richard was there. Greg Ashford was there. 3 other senior executives I barely knew. Jordan stood near the back, watching. Sloane was not there. She had been moved to a different floor. I had not seen her since Wednesday. Hiroshi sat at the head of the table. I sat next to him. Richard sat across from us. The rest of the room stood or sat along the edges, witnesses to the moment. Richard stood and gave a short speech about partnership and vision and the future of Meridian Capital. It was polished. It was empty. I stopped listening halfway through. When he finished, he looked at me. Nora, would you like to say anything? I had not prepared anything. I had not thought I would need to. I stood. I just want to thank Hiroshi and the Takeda team for their trust, I said. This deal represents 18 months of work, and I am grateful to have been part of it. I look forward to what we will build together. Hiroshi nodded. Thank you, Nora. The trust is mutual. We sat. Hiroshi picked up the pen. He signed the first page, then the second, then the third. His general counsel signed. His CFO signed. One by one, the pages turned. Richard signed for Meridian. I signed as the lead on the deal, and then it was done. $4.8 billion, 7 years, 3 countries, the largest deal in Meridian's history. The room applauded. People shook hands. Someone took a photo. Richard smiled and put his hand on my shoulder like we were a team. I smiled back, but I felt nothing. Hiroshi stood and shook my hand. Congratulations, Nora. Congratulations, I said. He leaned in slightly, lowering his voice. I meant what I said. The trust is in you. If you ever leave Meridian, call me. I looked at him. He was serious. I will, I said. He smiled and walked out with his team. Richard followed them to the elevator, still playing the gracious host. The room emptied. Jordan came over and hugged me. You did it, he said. You actually did it. I did, I said. How does it feel? I thought about it. How did it feel? It felt like winning a game I had not wanted to play. It felt like proving a point to people who would forget it the moment I stopped being useful. It felt like standing on top of a mountain I had climbed alone, only to realize the view was not what I had expected. It feels complicated, I said. Jordan laughed. Fair. He left. I stayed. I walked over to the table and picked up the signed contract. The leather binder was heavy in my hands. I opened it to the first page. Hiroshi's signature. Richard's signature. Mine. I thought about the last time I had held this contract. Monday morning. Sitting in a Starbucks with a cardboard box and no job. Wondering if everything I had built was gone. It was the same contract. The same pages. The same deal. But it meant something different now. It was not just my victory. It was their survival. They had fired me. They had lied about me. They had nearly destroyed the deal because someone who did not know what she was doing had made a decision without thinking. And I had saved them. Not because I wanted to. Not because I owed them anything. But because walking away would have cost me more than staying. I had won. But the win was not clean. I had my title. I had my raise. I had my percentage of the deal, which would be a significant amount of money. I had my autonomy agreement signed and filed with HR. But I also had something else, a clarity I had not had before. Meridian did not care about me. They cared about what I could do for them. And the moment I stopped being able to do that, they would let me go again. Maybe not the same way, maybe not as brutally, but they would let me go. That was the cost. Not money, not status, but the knowledge that I was alone here, that I always would be. I closed the contract and put it back in my portfolio. The same portfolio I had carried out of the building 5 days ago. I walked back to my office. I set the portfolio on my desk. I sat down and looked out the window. The city stretched out below me. Glass towers, traffic, people moving through their lives, unaware of the deal that had just been signed, unaware of the fight it had taken to get here. I thought about what Hiroshi had said. If you ever leave Meridian, call me. I would. Someday. But not yet. For now, I would stay. I would build the international division. I would close more deals. I would prove, over and over, that I was worth keeping. And I would remember. I would remember the conference room, the security guard, the lie Sloan told, the panic in Richard's voice when he realized what he had lost. I would remember that competence is not enough, that trust is fragile, that institutions do not protect you. I would remember that I had saved them, and I would make sure they never forgot it. I opened my laptop. I had work to do, another client to call, another deal to start building. The contract sat on my desk, signed and final. It was done. But I was not.